He divorced women like it was a hobby, until one wife made him regret everything. I signed my fourth divorce papers on a Tuesday morning the same way I signed business contracts. Quickly, cleanly, without looking at the other person's face. My lawyer slid the papers across the desk. I signed. Done. For marriages, for endings, and I felt nothing except mild inconvenience about the asset division. That was 8 months ago. Today I'm sitting in a courthouse hallway that smells like floor cleaner and anxiety, waiting to testify in a fraud case. Except I'm not the one accusing anyone of fraud. I'm the one being accused. And the woman who built the case against me, the woman who gathered every document, every witness, every financial record for the past 3 years, is my fourth ex-wife. The one I dismissed most carelessly. The one I thought would disappear quietly like the others. Her name is Nora, and she didn't disappear. Let me tell you what kind of man I was before Nora Chen walked into my life, because you need to understand the full picture to understand what happened next. My name is Richard Calloway. I was 44 years old, worth approximately $60 million, and I treated marriage like a subscription service. Useful for a while, easy to cancel, always another option available. 3 ex-wives. 3 women who trusted me. 3 settlements I'd engineered to be as minimal as legally possible. Using prenuptial agreements my lawyers crafted specifically to leave my wives with almost nothing regardless of what they'd contributed or sacrificed. I was proud of that system. I called it being practical. Nora called it something else entirely. And in approximately 40 minutes, a judge is going to hear exactly what she called it. I should have known from the moment I met her that she was different. The signs were all there. I chose not to read them. Let me go back to the beginning because this story doesn't start in a courthouse. It starts at a charity dinner 3 years ago, when a quiet woman in a blue dress looked at me across a table and said something no one had ever said to me before. She said, "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Calloway, and I'm not impressed." I married her 4 months later. Biggest mistake of my life. Best thing that ever happened to me. I'm still working out which one is true. The charity dinner was for children's literacy. I attended because my company donated and it was good optics. I spent most of these events networking, calculating, making connections worth more than the donation check. Nora was seated at my table by accident. A last-minute placement adjustment. She wore a simple blue dress, no jewelry except small pearl earrings, and she spent the first hour of dinner reading the event program like it was actually interesting. I noticed her because she didn't notice me. Everyone noticed me. I was Richard Calloway, CEO of Calloway Development Group, regularly featured in Forbes, recently divorced for the 3rd time in a way that made headlines for exactly 1 day before my PR team buried it. "You're reading that very carefully," I said, my standard opener. Charming, slightly amused. She looked up. They typoed the literacy statistics. It says 30% when the actual number is closer to 43% in this region. I'm trying to figure out if it's a mistake or deliberate underreporting to make the problem seem more manageable. I blinked. Nobody at these dinners talked like that. "You work in education?" I asked. "Data analysis. I consult for nonprofits on program effectiveness." She set the program down. "You're Richard Calloway. You donated $100,000 tonight and you've been checking your phone under the table every 4 minutes." "Guilty," I said, charmed despite myself. "Important deal closing." "No, it isn't." She said it pleasantly, like she was commenting on the weather. "You're checking it because you're bored and it makes you look important. Nobody closes deals at 7 p.m. on a Friday through text messages." I should have been offended. Instead I laughed. Actually laughed, the surprised kind. "You're direct. I find it saves time." She turned back to her program. "You've been married 3 times. Divorced 3 times. Average marriage length 14 months. Your prenuptial agreements are famous in certain legal circles for being particularly one-sided." The laugh died in my throat. "You researched me?" "I research everyone I'm seated next to at these events. You never know when someone might be useful." She looked at me directly then, and I saw something in her eyes I couldn't quite identify. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Calloway, and I'm not impressed. Most women I met either wanted something from me or wanted to fix me. Nora Chun seemed to want neither, and that made her the most interesting person I'd met in years. I pursued her relentlessly after that dinner. She made me work for every phone call, every coffee meeting, every dinner. She didn't care about my money. She made decent money herself and lived carefully. She didn't care about my status. She barely tolerated my charm. What she did was challenge every single thing I said. "Why do you divorce them?" she asked one evening, 2 months into whatever we were doing. We were at her apartment. Small, meticulously organized, full of books, instead of my penthouse. "Marriage runs its course," I said. "Better to be honest about it ending than drag it out." "That's not honesty, that's cowardice." She was cooking, something simple, moving through her tiny kitchen with efficient precision. "You marry women who are impressed by you. Then when they stop being impressed and start being real, you find an excuse to leave. That's reductive. Is it wrong?" I didn't answer because it wasn't wrong exactly. It just wasn't something anyone had said out loud before. "Why are you here, Richard?" She turned to face me. "With me. I'm not impressed by you. I never will be. So why do you keep calling?" "Because you're different." "Different how?" "Because I don't fall at your feet." "Because you see me," I said, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in months. "Everyone else sees the money or the reputation or the potential benefit. You just see me. And you still show up." Something softened in her face. "I show up because underneath all that practiced charm, you're deeply lonely. And I recognize that because I am too." That was the night I fell in love with Norichin. Or what I thought was love. I'm still not sure I understood what love actually was until much later. We married 4 months after that charity dinner. Simple ceremony, just a handful of people. My lawyer drew up the standard prenuptial agreement. Nora read it carefully. All 47 pages. "This is incredibly one-sided," she said. "It's standard for someone with my assets." "Standard for you, maybe." She set it down. "If I sign this and we divorce, I leave with almost nothing regardless of circumstance. Regardless of what I contribute or sacrifice. Regardless of fault." "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment. That was the first red flag, though I didn't recognize it then. Something in her eyes, calculation, maybe, or decision. "Okay," she said simply and signed it. I should have asked why. I should have wondered what kind of person reads a prenup that exploitative and signs it anyway without negotiation. But I was too relieved that she'd signed to question it. The first year of our marriage was the best year of my life. Nora was brilliant and funny and had no tolerance for my bullshit. She called me on every manipulation, every half-truth, every moment I tried to be charming instead of real. "Stop performing," she'd say. "I already married you. You don't have to sell me anything." She worked from home most days, consulting for various nonprofits, always buried in spreadsheets and data models. She was meticulous about everything, her files, her schedules, her records. "You keep copies of everything," I observed one day, watching her file away receipts, statements, contracts. "Data is only useful if it's organized," she said. "Chaos leads to mistakes." That should have been the second red flag. Around the 14-month mark, right on schedule with my previous marriages, I started getting restless. The novelty was wearing off. Nora had stopped being a fascinating challenge and started being a person with needs and expectations. She wanted me home for dinner. She wanted to talk about my day. She wanted things I didn't know how to give. I started staying late at the office, taking business trips that could have been phone calls, creating distance. Nora noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You're doing it again," she said one evening. Month 16 of our marriage. "Doing what?" "Preparing your exit." She said it calmly, without anger. "You're building a case in your head for why this marriage has run its course. I can see you doing it." "That's not." "Don't lie to me, Richard. If you want to leave, just leave. But don't insult me by pretending you're not already halfway out the door." That was when I should have stopped. Should have looked at the woman across from me and asked myself what I was doing. Instead, I called my lawyer the next morning. "Draw up the divorce papers," I said. "Standard terms. I want this done quietly." "Fourth time, Richard." my lawyer said carefully. You sure about this? Completely sure. She signed the prenup. This should be straightforward. It was anything but straightforward. I served Nora the divorce papers on a Wednesday morning, left them on the kitchen counter before she woke up, then went to the office. That's how I'd done it with the others. Clean, impersonal, no messy emotional confrontations. My phone stayed silent until noon. I expected tears, expected phone calls from her lawyer, from Nora herself, from mutual friends asking what happened. I'd navigated 3 of these before. I knew the pattern. Nora's pattern was different. At noon, a single text message arrived. Asterisk. I'll need 2 weeks before I move out. I have some things to organize. Asterisk. That was it. No anger. No questions. No grief. I stared at my phone for a full minute. Something about the calmness of it was deeply unsettling, but I pushed that feeling aside. She was dignified in exit, that was all. Better than screaming. She took it well? My lawyer Marcus asked when I called. Apparently. Pause I didn't like. Richard, has she done anything unusual lately? Anything you've noticed? What kind of question is that? Protective question. 4th divorce from a high-asset individual. Sometimes people prepare things in advance. She signed the prenup, I said. She gets the settlement amount we specified, $50,000 in 30 days. There's nothing to prepare for. Another pause. All right, I'll file today. I should have listened to Marcus's hesitation. He'd been my lawyer for 12 years. He knew things I didn't about the anatomy of my own bad decisions. The 2 weeks Nora asked for passed quietly. I stayed in a hotel. She stayed in our penthouse, organizing her things, and I found out later she wasn't organizing her clothes or her books or her personal effects. She was organizing evidence. On the last day of the 2 weeks, she moved out. Maria, my housekeeper, called to tell me the apartment was empty. I went back that evening, walked through rooms that felt strangely hollow, and noticed 2 things. First, Nora had left everything. Every piece of furniture we'd chosen together, every item I'd paid for, every decoration she'd selected for the apartment. She'd taken only what she brought into the marriage, her books, her laptop, her clothes. Second, she'd left something on the kitchen counter where I'd left the divorce papers. A single envelope, unsealed. Inside was a note in her precise handwriting. Asterisk Richard. I knew this was coming before we married. I know you think the prenup protects you completely. I need you to understand something. I didn't sign that prenup because I was naive. I signed it because I was prepared. Enjoy the quiet. It won't last long. Nora. Asterisk. I read it 3 times. Then I called Marcus. Marcus. How quickly can we finalize the divorce? Standard timeline is 60 to 90 days. Why, what's? Accelerate it. Whatever it costs. Richard, what happened? She left me a note. I read it to him. Silence on the line. Then, okay, I'm filing an emergency motion tomorrow morning. And Richard, I need you to think carefully. Is there anything in your business dealings over the past 2 years that could be problematic if someone looked closely? My stomach dropped. What kind of problematic? Any kind. I thought about it. Callaway Development Group was successful, enormously profitable, and had been built on practices that were aggressive, legally aggressive. There were property acquisitions that skirted zoning ethics. There were contractor relationships that certain regulatory bodies might find interesting. There were financial structures that my accountants described as creative. Nothing illegal. Nothing provably illegal. Nothing that matters, I told Marcus. Right? He didn't sound convinced. I'll file tomorrow. I put down the note, stood in my empty kitchen, and tried to identify the feeling spreading through my chest. Took me a moment to recognize it, because I hadn't felt it in a long time. It was fear. The divorce proceedings began in 30 days, not 60, because Nora's lawyer filed a counter-motion that stopped my accelerated timeline cold. Her lawyer's name was Diana Park. I knew of her. Everyone in certain circles knew of Diana Park. She was 40 years old, relentless, and had a particular specialty in asset concealment cases. Asset concealment. I brought that term to Marcus with my jaw tight. She's hired Diana Park, I said. Marcus went very still. Diana Park doesn't take simple divorce cases. I know. Diana Park takes cases where she believes there's financial misconduct, hidden assets, fraudulent structures, undervalued disclosures. He set down his pen. Richard, I need you to tell me everything. Right now. Everything about every financial structure in your company that Nora might have had access to information about. She's a data analyst, I said slowly. She works from home. Did she ever work from the penthouse? Did she ever have access to your home office? The bottom fell out of my stomach. Yes. Your files?
You can't possibly
your
believe
computer.
This. Look at me when
I
I'm
had
talking
security
to you.
protocols.
I know exactly
Did
what I'm
she
looking
ever
at.
help
It's
you
over.
with anything work-related? Even casually? Even once? I thought back. 18 months of marriage. Nora always at her laptop. Nora who noticed everything, who kept copies of everything, who organized everything meticulously. 6 months into our marriage, I'd had a major deal closing under time pressure while my assistant was sick. I'd asked Nora to scan and file some documents. Just temporarily. Just once. She'd had access to my filing system for exactly 4 hours. Once, I said. She helped me file some documents once. Marcus closed his eyes. How comprehensive was your filing system? Comprehensive, I said quietly. Very comprehensive. Richard. He opened his eyes. What exactly is in those files? I looked at him across the desk and realized the answer to that question was going to define the next year of my life. Everything, I said. The point of no return wasn't the divorce papers. It wasn't Nora's note. It wasn't even Marcus's question. It was what happened 3 days later, when I came home to find 2 men in suits waiting in the lobby of my building with badges that identified them as investigators from the State Financial Crimes Unit. Mr. Calloway, the taller one said, we'd like to ask you some questions about Calloway Development Group's acquisition of the Riverside District properties in 2021. The Riverside acquisitions. The most aggressive of my aggressive deals. 3 city blocks of low-income housing, acquired through a process that involved certain city council members receiving certain benefits that my lawyers had structured in ways that made them technically legal but weren't. My lawyer will be present for any conversation, I said. Of course, the shorter one said. He handed me a document. We'll be in touch. I called Marcus from the elevator. They're investigating the Riverside acquisitions, I said. Who filed the complaint? I already knew. I think you know who filed the complaint. Silence. Then, Richard, this is significantly beyond a divorce proceeding. I know. If Nora had access to your files and saw what was in those acquisition records, she would have understood exactly what she was looking at, I said. She's a data analyst. She analyzes financial structures for nonprofits. She'd know exactly which regulatory body to contact and exactly what to give them. When? Marcus asked. When did she file this? I thought about the timeline. The 2 weeks she'd asked for after receiving the divorce papers. The calm text message. The note on the kitchen counter. She filed it during the 2 weeks before she moved out, I said. She spent those 2 weeks organizing everything, and then she handed it to the investigators. Richard, Marcus said carefully, this isn't someone reacting to a divorce. This is someone who planned for this possibility. Nora's voice came back to me clearly. I knew this was coming before we married. Before we married. She'd known before we married. She'd signed that prenup and walked into my life with her eyes fully open, knowing exactly what I was and exactly what she intended to do if I became it. The question I should have asked 18 months ago surfaced with horrible clarity. Why would a brilliant, principled woman marry a man she'd already identified as someone who exploited his wives? Unless she hadn't come to be loved. Unless she'd come to stop him. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my hotel bed staring at the ceiling, running through every conversation, every moment, every detail of 18 months of marriage, and reframing all of it through this new lens. Nora researching me before the charity dinner. Not because she researched everyone she sat next to, or not only that, Because she'd already identified me as a target. Nora reading the prenup carefully. Not because she was cautious. Because she was documenting exactly how predatory it was. Nora helping me file documents for 4 hours. Not as a favor. As an intelligence operation. Nora keeping meticulous records of everything. Not out of habit. Out of preparation. Every single thing I'd found fascinating and unusual about her had been a tool. And I'd been so charmed by the novelty of a woman who didn't fall at my feet that I'd never once asked why. I called Marcus at 6 in the morning. Find out everything about Nora Chun, I said. Before she met me. Where she worked, who she knew, whether she had any connection to my previous wives. Richard. Just do it. By noon, Marcus had a preliminary report. Nora Chun, 38 years old, data analyst. Legitimate career, genuine credentials. But 3 years before she met me, she'd worked briefly as a consultant for a nonprofit legal aid organization. One that specialized in helping women navigate exploitative divorce proceedings. And one of their clients, 2 years before Nora and I met, had been my third ex-wife, Caroline. I called Marcus back immediately. She knew Caroline, I said. It appears so. The legal aid organization's client files are confidential, so we can't confirm the specifics of their interaction. But the overlap in timing and organization is damning, I said. Nora knew Caroline. Caroline told her what happened in our divorce. And then Nora engineered meeting me. The charity dinner wasn't accidental, Marcus said slowly. No. I thought back to the seating adjustment, the last-minute placement change. She arranged to be at that table. With me. Richard, this changes the nature of what we're dealing with. If Nora entered this marriage with premeditated intent to gather evidence against you, there are legal arguments we could make about the validity of. Stop, I said, because even as the words formed in my mind, the argument that Nora had deceived me, had manipulated the marriage. I heard how hollow it sounded. She had come into this marriage prepared. But what had she been prepared for? My actual criminal conduct. The Riverside acquisitions. The prenuptial exploitation. The pattern of marrying and discarding women with calculated efficiency. She hadn't invented the crimes. She'd just been paying attention. Keep digging, I told Marcus. I want to know exactly what she gave the investigators and exactly what they have. Over the next 3 weeks, the pressure built from every direction simultaneously. The Financial Crimes Unit made it official, a formal investigation into Callaway Development Group's acquisition practices across 4 major projects spanning 6 years. The Riverside acquisitions were the centerpiece, but they were also looking at 2 other developments where my methods had been equally creative. My board called an emergency meeting. I sat at the head of the table and watched 12 people try to decide whether to distance themselves from me or wait to see how bad it got. What exactly are we looking at? My CFO Thomas asked. He'd been with me for 8 years and I'd always trusted him completely, which meant he knew where most of the bodies were buried. An investigation, I said, based on information provided by my ex-wife. Your current ex-wife or a previous one? Current. Nora. The room got very quiet in a specific way, the quiet of people recalibrating. What did she have access to? Thomas asked carefully. Enough. I looked around the table. I need everyone in this room to understand that we did nothing that wasn't legally structured at the time. Legally structured, repeated my general counsel Patricia, who had not made eye contact with me since the meeting started. That's a careful phrase, Richard. It's an accurate phrase. The Riverside acquisitions involved city council members receiving benefits that were structured to avoid reporting thresholds, Patricia said flatly. I advised against that structure at the time. My advice is on record. And the structure was legal. The structure was designed to skirt the line of legal. There's a difference between something being legal and something being designed to appear legal. She finally looked at me. If someone with Nora's analytical skills sat down with those files and mapped the full structure of those transactions, they would be able to present a very compelling case that the intent was corrupt even if individual elements were technically defensible. Intent isn't criminal. Intent, combined with outcome, combined with a pattern across multiple transactions, can absolutely be criminal. She closed her folder. I think we need to talk about cooperation. Absolutely not. Richard. Thomas leaned forward. How much did she give them? I didn't know. That was the problem. I didn't know exactly what Nora had found in those 4 hours, what she'd copied, what she'd analyzed in the months afterward, what she'd delivered to the investigators. I was fighting a case without knowing the full evidence against me. I made a decision I'm not proud of. I hired someone to find Nora, not to confront her, not to threaten her. I told myself I just needed to understand what I was dealing with. I needed to know where she was, who she was talking to, how far this had gone. His name was Frank. He'd done background work for me before, locating assets, verifying information. I paid him to find Nora's current location and determine who she'd been meeting with. Within 4 days, Frank reported back. Nora was living in a modest apartment across the city. She was meeting regularly with Diana Park and with investigators. She was also, Frank reported, meeting with someone else. Someone I recognized. My second ex-wife, Margaret. I sat with that information for a full day. Margaret, who'd signed her prenup and walked away with almost nothing after 19 months of marriage. Quiet, gentle Margaret who'd cried through the entire divorce process and then disappeared from my life completely. Except she hadn't disappeared. She'd apparently found Nora, or Nora had found her. I called Marcus. Nora has been meeting with Margaret, and possibly Carolyn. She may be building a pattern of conduct case. Not just the Riverside acquisitions, a full pattern. The prenups, the divorces, all of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Richard, a pattern of conduct argument would transform this from a business fraud case into something much broader. If she can demonstrate that you systematically exploited multiple women through fraudulently constructed prenuptial agreements while simultaneously committing financial misconduct. The prenups weren't fraudulent. They were aggressive but legal. Were they? Marcus's voice was careful. All 4 prenups were drafted by the same firm, using language specifically designed to minimize payouts regardless of circumstance. If any of those women were married under false pretenses. Define false pretenses. Richard, did you ever intend any of those marriages to last? The question landed in the silence. I thought about wife number 1, Angela, whom I'd married at 32 because she was beautiful and it seemed like the right time. I'd started mentally exiting around month 12. Wife number 2, Margaret, married at 37, quiet and kind, gone by month 15. Wife number 3, Carolyn, whom I'd married partly because she ran in the right social circles and divorced because she'd started asking questions about my business that made me uncomfortable. And Nora. That's not a legal definition, I said finally. No, Marcus agreed. But it's the question a jury will ask themselves. A jury. 3 months ago, I'd been planning a quarterly earnings call. Now I was thinking about juries. Fix this, I said. Whatever it takes. Find a way to fix this. I'm trying, Marcus said. But Richard, I need you to be honest with me about something. What? Did you know? When you married these women, signed these agreements, ran these acquisitions, did you know it was wrong? The hotel room was silent. Outside, traffic moved through the city below. Richard, I knew it was aggressive, I said. That's not what I asked. I put the phone down without answering, because the answer was yes. I'd always known. I just built enough structure around it that I could look at any individual piece and call it legal and never look at the whole picture. Nora had looked at the whole picture, and then she'd made sure everyone else could see it too. 2 months into the investigation, Frank delivered one more piece of information that changed everything. Your wife kept a journal, he said. Ex-wife. She kept a detailed record, not just financial documents, a written account of conversations, observations, dates, times. 18 months of documentation of your behavior, your statements, your admissions. Admissions? My voice went flat. What admissions? Frank slid a single page across the table. A transcription. He'd clearly obtained it through means I didn't want to examine of a single journal entry. dated 4 months into our marriage. I read the relevant section. R said tonight, after his third drink, that the prenup was the best insurance policy a smart man could buy. Said his lawyers had specifically structured it so that no judge could overturn it regardless of what happened during the marriage. He seemed proud of this. I asked if he felt any guilt about how Carolyn's settlement had been handled, and he said, and I'm quoting directly, "Guilt is for people who don't plan ahead." I'm documenting this verbatim because it perfectly encapsulates the pattern. I remembered that evening. I remembered saying exactly those things. I hadn't known I was being documented. I hadn't known the quiet woman across the dinner table with her glass of wine was writing down every word. How many entries? I asked. The journal runs to approximately 200 pages, Frank said. 200 pages. 18 months of marriage documented in 200 pages of clear, precise, analytical prose. I thought about the first night we'd talked at the charity dinner. About how Nora had said she found directness saved time. About the precision of everything she did. She hadn't been living our marriage. She'd been recording it. But here was the thing that hit me hardest. Sitting in that room reading that journal entry. Everything she'd written was true. Marcus called me on a Thursday morning with a voice that told me everything before he said a word. "I need you to come in," he said. "Today. Now." I was at his office within the hour. He had documents spread across his entire desk. More paper than I'd seen in any single meeting. Sitting across from him was a woman I didn't recognize. Late 50s, gray-suited, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. "This is Eleanor Voss," Marcus said. "She's a specialist in federal financial crimes defense." I asked her to review everything. Federal. The word sat in my chest like a stone. "Tell me," I said. Eleanor Voss looked at me over her glasses with the expression of a doctor about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "Mr. Calloway, I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing what the investigators have, what your ex-wife provided, and what your own files contain. I want to walk you through what we're dealing with because I don't think you fully understand the scope." "Walk me through it." She opened the first folder. The Riverside acquisitions involve payments made to 3 city council members through subsidiary LLCs structured specifically to obscure the source. On their own, any one of these transactions is defensible. Together, mapped across a timeline with documented intent. She glanced at a page I recognized as being from Nora's journal. "They constitute a pattern of systematic corruption. That's a federal charge, Mr. Calloway. Not a civil matter." I kept my face neutral. "Continue." "The Harmon District development in 2020 involved falsified environmental assessments. Again, the individual documents are signed off by licensed assessors. But the assessors in question received contracts from your company totaling $400,000 in the same fiscal year. The conflict of interest was deliberately concealed. Standard industry practice." "It is not standard practice to conceal it," Eleanor said firmly. "Aggressive is when you push the rules. This is when you hide the pushing." She opened a second folder. "Your ex-wife's documentation is extraordinary. I want you to understand what she built. She's not just a witness. She's provided an analytical framework, a data model essentially, that maps every transaction, every payment, every concealed relationship across 6 years of your company's operations. She took your filing system and turned it into a prosecution roadmap. For hours. She'd had access to my files for 4 hours. "How?" I said. "For hours isn't enough time to." "She photographed everything," Eleanor said. "And she's a data analyst. She didn't need to understand it all in the moment. She took the raw material and spent the next 14 months analyzing it from her laptop in your penthouse while you went to your office and thought she was working on nonprofit consulting." I thought about all those hours I'd come home to find Nora at her laptop, absorbed in whatever she was working on. The quiet competence I'd found attractive. The focused expression. She'd been dismantling my empire one data point at a time while I'd been living 10 feet away. "What's the exposure?" I asked. Eleanor and Marcus exchanged a look. "Worst case," Eleanor said. "Federal fraud, corruption of public officials, conspiracy, potential sentence in the range of 15 to 20 years. The room didn't spin. Everything went very still, which was somehow worse. And the divorce case itself? My voice was remarkably steady. Your ex-wife's attorney has filed a motion to invalidate the prenuptial agreement on grounds of fraudulent inducement, Marcus said. Their argument is that you entered the marriage with no genuine intention of maintaining it, that the prenuptial agreement was a tool of financial exploitation rather than a legitimate asset protection measure, and that the pattern across 4 marriages demonstrates systematic fraud against multiple women. That argument is compelling, Eleanor said flatly, especially combined with journal documentation of statements you made about the purpose of the prenup. And especially given that Diana Park has now obtained statements from all 3 of your previous wives. All 3. Angela, Margaret, Carolyn. All 3 had talked to Diana Park. What did they say? Marcus slid a summary across the desk. I read it with my chest tightening word by word. Angela, first wife, married 14 months, stated that I had told her, 6 months before we married, that I didn't believe in long marriages but that marriage was useful for business and social positioning. She'd assumed he was joking. She hadn't been. Margaret, second wife, 19 months, stated that I had systematically isolated her from her professional network during the marriage, undermining her career in ways that made her financially dependent and therefore less able to contest the divorce settlement. She'd left with $50,000 from a marriage where she'd reduced her income by 60% to support my business schedule. Carolyn, third wife, 14 months, stated that I had specifically discouraged her from seeking independent legal review of the prenuptial agreement, telling her that suggesting she get her own lawyer would indicate a lack of trust. She'd signed without counsel. 3 women. 3 different forms of calculated harm. 3 stories that, placed beside each other and beside Nora's meticulous documentation, told a story about a man who had built an entire system of exploitation and called it practicality. I set down the summary. There's something else, Marcus said. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, which was unusual for a man I'd watched stay composed through every legal crisis of my career. The investigators found a connection you need to know about. What connection? 2 of the city council members involved in the Riverside acquisitions. They were also involved in rezoning decisions that affected properties where, he paused, where your third ex-wife Carolyn's family business operated. The rezoning negatively impacted that business significantly. There's a question being raised about whether that was coincidental. I stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying the investigators are exploring whether you used your relationships with those council members not just for your own acquisitions, but potentially to create pressure on people in your personal life. He held my gaze. Richard, did you have anything to do with the rezoning decisions that affected Carolyn's family business? The silence that followed was its own answer. I hadn't ordered it. I hadn't explicitly asked for it. But I had mentioned, to one of those council members, over an expensive dinner, that Carolyn's family business was making our divorce complicated because of its asset valuation. And the rezoning had happened 4 months later, devaluing that business significantly and simplifying the settlement calculation. I hadn't connected those dots at the time, or I hadn't let myself connect them. I need some air, I said. Richard. 5 minutes. I stood in the hallway outside Marcus's office and leaned against the wall and did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I tried to add up the actual human cost of everything I'd done. Angela, who'd believed she was marrying someone who loved her, and left a 14-month marriage with $50,000 and shattered confidence. Margaret, who'd shrunk her entire professional life to accommodate mine and walked away with almost nothing and spent 2 years rebuilding. Carolyn, whose family business had been quietly, plausibly destroyed as a side effect of my divorce management. And Nora, who'd walked into my life already knowing what I was, who'd spent 18 months living inside my destruction and documenting it, who'd signed a exploitative prenup deliberately because she wasn't there for the money. Who had she been doing this for? Just for justice? For some abstract principle about accountability? Or for Angela and Margaret and Carolyn? Or for the people displaced from the Riverside District housing? I walked back into Marcus's office and sat down. Tell me the rest, I said. Eleanor looked at me steadily. Your ex-wife has also been in contact with 7 families displaced from the Riverside District. She's helped them organize a civil suit that will run parallel to the criminal investigation. And she's provided her complete analytical model to a financial journalist at the Tribune who is preparing a full investigative piece. When does it publish? We believe within 2 weeks. I nodded slowly. So in 2 weeks, everything is public. Yes. And the criminal investigation timeline? They'll likely move to formal charges within 60 days. I sat with all of it, the full weight of it, the thing I'd spent 12 years carefully not looking at directly. Then I asked the question I should have asked months ago, years ago, maybe my entire adult life. Is any of this defensible? Eleanor Voss took off her reading glasses and looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Legally, she said. Some of it with aggressive representation. But Mr. Calloway, and I've represented some difficult clients in 30 years, so I want you to understand the weight of what I'm about to say. When I look at the complete picture of what you've built and how you've built it, I don't think legal defensibility is really the question anymore. What is the question? The question, she said quietly, is what kind of man you want to be when this is over. I didn't go back to the hotel that night. I went to my penthouse, the one I hadn't stayed in since Nora moved out, and walked through rooms that still felt like her absence. The investigators had already been through it once, documenting, photographing. They'd left everything in place, but somehow the apartment felt violated anyway. Or maybe it had always been violated and I was only just noticing. I poured whiskey I didn't drink and sat in the dark and tried to figure out exactly when I'd become this person. My phone rang constantly. My board members, my investors, business partners who'd suddenly remembered urgent matters elsewhere. I watched it light up and vibrate and ignored every call except one. My first ex-wife, Angela. I stared at her name on the screen for 3 rings before I answered. Angela. Richard. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, soft, careful. I heard you might be trying to reach your ex-wives. Marcus called my lawyer. I wasn't. I stopped. Why are you calling? Because I wanted to tell you myself, before you heard it from lawyers. I gave Diana Park a full statement. Everything about our marriage, the prenup, the things you said. She paused. I want you to know I didn't do it for revenge. Why did you do it? Because Nora asked me to. And when she explained what she was building, Richard, she's not doing this to punish you. She's doing it to stop you. There's a difference? Yes, Angela said firmly. Punishment is about the past. This is about the future. About the women who would have been wife number 5 and 6 and 7. About the communities you would have displaced in your next development. She showed me the pattern. Not just with us, with everything. And she asked if I wanted to help her end it. I closed my eyes. So all 3 of you, all 3 of us talked to Diana Park. All 3 of us are cooperating with the investigation. And Richard, her voice softened slightly. All 3 of us were relieved when Nora found us, because we thought we were alone. We thought we were the problem, that we'd failed somehow. Finding out it was a pattern, that it was never about us individually, that was the first time any of us stopped blaming ourselves. The weight of that settled over me. I hurt you, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes. All of you. Yes. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate and foreign in my mouth, like a language I'd never properly learned. Angela was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can accept that yet. Maybe eventually. But Richard, you should know something else. Margaret tried. After your divorce, she tried to build a case to find a lawyer who would challenge the prenup. Nobody would take it. Your legal team was too good, too connected. She gave up after 2 years. I didn't know that. Of course you didn't. You never looked back. No anger in her voice, just statement of fact. That's why what Nora did is different. She didn't fight you from a position of weakness after you'd already destroyed the marriage. She came in prepared. She's the first one who was smart enough and strong enough to beat you at your own game. After we hung up, I sat in the dark and thought about that. Nora hadn't just documented my destruction of our marriage. She'd studied 3 previous marriages and learned exactly how I operated. She'd identified the pattern, the weaknesses, the places where I thought I was invulnerable. And then she'd married me anyway, That took a particular kind of courage I couldn't begin to comprehend. The Tribune article published 9 days later. I found out the same way the rest of the world did. Someone sent me a link at 6 in the morning with the subject line, "You should see this." The headline, "Pattern of Predation. How Richard Callaway Built an Empire on Exploitation." It was comprehensive. 8,000 words. Front page of the business section with a full investigative team byline. They'd interviewed all 3 ex-wives. They'd talked to families displaced from Riverside. They'd obtained court documents, financial records, internal company communications. And they'd spoken to Nora. There was a photo of her, the only recent one I'd seen since she moved out. She was standing outside her modest apartment, arms crossed, expression serious. The caption read, "Nora Chun, data analyst and Callaway's 4th ex-wife, spent 18 months documenting what she calls systematic exploitation disguised as business." The article quoted her extensively. "This wasn't about revenge," she told the reporter. "It was about documentation. Richard Callaway is extremely intelligent and extremely careful. He operates in spaces that are technically legal but morally bankrupt. Individual instances can be explained away, but patterns don't lie. When you map behavior across years, across multiple contexts, business and personal, the picture becomes very clear." They asked her why she married me knowing what I was. "Because someone had to get close enough to see the whole system," she said. His ex-wives saw pieces. His business partners saw pieces. Nobody saw everything. I needed to see everything to build a case strong enough that he couldn't litigate his way out of it. "That's a significant personal sacrifice," the interviewer noted. "It was 18 months of my life," Nora said. "Other people lost years, lost homes, lost careers. I knew what I was walking into. They didn't." I read the article 3 times. By noon, my phone had 400 unread messages. By evening, my board had called an emergency meeting. By the next morning, I'd been asked to step down as CEO of the company I'd built. "Voluntarily," they said. "For the optics. Just until this resolves." We all knew it wouldn't resolve in a way that ended with me back in that chair. I signed the papers, watched my CFO Thomas step into the role of interim CEO, walked out of the building I'd worked in for 15 years and felt nothing except a strange hollowness. Everything I'd built, the company, the reputation, the careful structures of power, was collapsing with a kind of efficient finality that Nora would have appreciated. She'd designed it that way, I realized. The article, the investigation, the civil suit, the ex-wife's statements, they'd all landed within the same 2-week window. Not coincidentally, coordinated. She'd built a comprehensive case and then executed it with perfect timing. I thought about her at her laptop in our penthouse. Quiet, focused, always working. I thought she was ignoring me. She'd been destroying me with careful precision. Marcus called with another update 3 days after the article published. "The prosecutors want to meet," he said. They're offering a deal." I sat up. "What kind of deal?" "Cooperation. Full cooperation. Testimony against the city council members. Detailed disclosure of every transaction. Complete financial transparency. In exchange, they'll recommend reduced charges and a sentence in the range of 3 to 5 years instead of 15 to 20. 3 to 5 years. Prison. The word that had been hovering in the background suddenly concrete and real. And if I don't take it, they take everything to trial. And Richard, with what they have now, with the article, with public sentiment, with 4 ex-wives and displaced families and a complete paper trail, you will lose. And the sentence will be maximum. How long do I have to decide? 48 hours. I hung up and sat in my hotel room and looked at the ruins of my life spread around me. No wife, no family, no company, no reputation. Friends who'd stopped returning calls. Business partners who'd sent lawyers instead of condolences. Everything I'd built had been built on other people's losses. And now it was my turn to lose. The isolation was complete. Absolute. I'd spent years building walls to keep people at exactly the distance I wanted them. And now I was alone inside those walls with no way out. That night, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I cried. Not dignified tears. Not controlled grief. Just desperate, ugly sobbing in a hotel room where nobody could hear me and nobody would have cared if they could. I cried for Angela, who'd believed I loved her. For Margaret, who'd spent 2 years trying to fight back and given up. For Carolyn, whose family business I'd casually destroyed. For families pushed out of Riverside. For every person who'd intersected with my ambition and come away diminished. And I cried for Nora, who'd spent 18 months living with a man she knew was hollow and documented it all with clear-eyed precision because someone needed to and she was strong enough to do it. I cried until I couldn't anymore. And then I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and understood with perfect clarity that I deserved everything that was happening. That was the bottom. That moment of absolute clarity about who I'd been and what I'd done and the fact that there was no talking my way out of it this time. No charm. No lawyers clever enough to find the loophole. No prenup to protect me. Just consequences. I called Marcus at 6 in the morning. "I want to meet with Nora," I said. Silence on the line. Then, "Richard, that's not advisable. Anything you say to her could. I don't care about advisability. Can you arrange it or not?" "Why?" "Because I need to understand something." Another pause. "I'll ask Diana Park." No promises. The answer came back 3 hours later. Nora would meet me. Neutral location. A coffee shop in a neighborhood neither of us frequented. Diana Park would be present, as would Marcus. Nothing I said would be off the record. I didn't care. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 2 in the afternoon. Nora was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with Diana Park beside her. She looked exactly the same. Neat dark hair, minimal jewelry, that expression of calm assessment I'd once found fascinating. Now I understood what I was being assessed for. Marcus and I sat down across from them. For a moment, nobody spoke. "Thank you for agreeing to this," I said. Nora nodded slightly. "You have 30 minutes. "I need to know why," I said. "Why you did it this way. You could have just walked away. You could have taken the settlement and disappeared like the others." "Could I?" She tilted her head slightly. "Margaret tried to fight you. You crushed her with legal fees until she gave up. Carolyn tried to speak to a reporter about the prenup. Your lawyers threatened her with a defamation suit. Angela just wanted to leave quietly, and you made sure she questioned herself for years afterward. You talked to all of them before you met me." "Yes. So this was planned. From the beginning." "Not exactly." She folded her hands on the table. "I knew who you were when I met you at that charity dinner. I knew about your pattern. I'd helped Caroline through her divorce 2 years earlier, not as her analyst, just as someone from the legal aid organization who listened. And I saw what your legal strategy did to her. How it made her feel like she was nothing. So you targeted me." "I researched you," Nora corrected. "And I made a choice to put myself in your proximity to see if the pattern was what I thought it was. If you'd been different in person, if there'd been any indication that the previous divorces were anomalies, that you had genuine remorse or were trying to change, I would have walked away. But I wasn't different." "No." Her voice was steady, clinical. "You were exactly what the pattern indicated. Charming, intelligent, and completely hollow. You looked at me like a puzzle to solve, not a person to know. And when I saw that, I made a decision. To destroy me. To document you," she said firmly. "There's a difference, Richard. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't manipulate you into committing crimes. I just paid attention to what you were already doing and made sure other people could see it clearly." Diana Park put a hand on Nora's arm. A subtle signal. But Nora shook her head slightly. She wanted to say this. "Do you know what the worst part was?" Nora asked. "It wasn't living with you knowing what you were. It wasn't even the 18 months of pretending. It was watching you be so smart about everything except people. You're brilliant, Richard. Genuinely brilliant. You built an empire. You could have done it ethically and still been enormously successful. But you chose exploitation because it was easier and more profitable, and you never once stopped to consider the actual human cost." "I'm considering it now," I said quietly. She studied me. "Are you? Or are you just afraid of consequences?" The question cut deep because I didn't know the answer. "I want to make this right," I said. You can't, Nora said flatly. You can't give Angela back the years she spent questioning her worth. You can't give Margaret back her career. You can't unbury Carolyn's family business. You can't put those families back in Riverside. There is no making this right. Then what do I do? You stop, she said simply. You stop fighting. You stop trying to find legal angles. You cooperate with the investigation fully. You accept responsibility. And you spend whatever time you have left trying to be less harmful. I looked at her across the table, this woman who'd shared my bed and my home for 18 months while building the case that would destroy me, and I saw no anger, no satisfaction, just clear-eyed assessment and bone-deep exhaustion. Did you ever like me at all? I asked. Even a little? She considered the question. There were moments I thought I saw someone underneath the performance. Someone who might be capable of actual connection if he ever stopped being afraid of it. But no, Richard. I never liked who you chose to be. That was somehow worse than hatred. I'm going to take the deal, I said. The prosecutor's deal. Full cooperation. 3 to 5 years. Diana Park's expression shifted slightly. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. Why? Nora asked. Because you're right. I can't make this right. But I can stop making it worse. I looked at Marcus, who was carefully keeping his face neutral. I want to do something else too. What? I want to void the prenup. All 4 prenups. I want Angela, Margaret, and Carolyn to receive equitable settlements based on what they would have been entitled to without the agreements. And I want to establish a fund for the Riverside families using personal assets outside the company structure. Diana Park leaned forward. Mr. Calloway, are you aware that voiding those agreements could expose you to? I'm aware, I said. I don't care. Nora was watching me with that assessing expression. That's not penance, Richard. It's just arithmetic. Money doesn't heal what you broke. I know, but it's what I have to give. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the fund for Riverside families. You'd need to structure it independently, with oversight from community representatives, not controlled by you or your company. Agreed. And the settlements for your ex-wives would need to be negotiated by Diana without interference from your legal team. Agreed. Diana Park was making notes rapidly. Marcus looked like he was watching a client commit elaborate financial suicide and trying to decide whether to stop it. Nora stood up. I'll believe it when the paperwork is filed. Nora, I stood too. Did you ever think this would work? 18 months is a long time to sustain something like this. I thought if I failed, at least I tried, she said. And if I succeeded, maybe the next woman you met would be spared. She picked up her bag. Turns out there won't be a next woman. So yes, Richard. It worked. She left with Diana Park. I sat back down across from Marcus, who was looking at me like he'd never seen me before. You just agreed to give away approximately $40 million, he said. Yes. The board will fight the use of personal assets for the Riverside Fund. Let them fight. Richard, are you doing this because you actually want to? Or because you think it'll help your sentencing? I thought about that. Examined my own motivations with more honesty than I'd applied to anything in years. Both, I said finally. I want the sentencing help. But I need to do something that isn't just protecting myself. Does that make sense? Not really, Marcus said. But I'll draw up the paperwork. The next 48 hours were the most honest work I'd ever done. I met with the prosecutors and their team, told them everything about the Riverside acquisitions, the council members, the falsified assessments, the shell companies, named names, provided documentation, answered every question without my lawyer's careful filtering. This is unusual, one of the prosecutors said at the end of the second day. Defendants at your level don't usually cooperate this thoroughly. I'm trying something new, I said. I met with Diana Park and provided complete financial disclosure for the prenup voiding. Watched her calculate what Angela, Margaret, and Carolyn should receive based on equitable division standards. The numbers were staggering. Collectively, about $15 million more than they'd received. This will drain a significant portion of your liquid assets, Diana said. Good. I met with community representatives from Riverside and worked with them to structure a fund that I had no control over. Put $12 million into it. Listened to them tell me exactly what my development had done to their neighborhood. Didn't defend myself. Didn't explain. Just listened. By the end of those 48 hours, I'd systematically dismantled every protection I'd spent years building. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept through the night. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late October. I wore a simple suit, not the custom Italian ones I'd favored, but something modest from a department store. Marcus said it didn't matter what I wore. The outcome was already determined. But it mattered to me. The courtroom was packed. I recognized reporters from the Tribune, from the business journals, from local news. I recognized Angela sitting 3 rows back, and Margaret beside her. Carolyn was there too, near the front. And Nora. She sat in the back corner with Diana Park, her expression as calm and assessing as ever. They were all there to watch this end. The prosecution went first. They laid out the charges I'd pled guilty to: corruption of public officials, falsification of documents, fraud. They detailed the Riverside acquisitions, the environmental assessment falsifications, the pattern of exploitation across multiple developments. Then they surprised me. "Your Honor," the lead prosecutor said, "while the defendant's crimes are serious and warrant significant punishment, we want to acknowledge his cooperation. Mr. Calloway provided comprehensive testimony against 3 city council members who are now facing their own charges. He voluntarily disclosed financial structures we might not have discovered otherwise, and he has taken meaningful steps toward restitution." She detailed the prenup voidings, the settlements, the Riverside Fund. $27 million in total restitution, structured without court order, without negotiation. "This doesn't excuse his conduct," she continued, "but it represents a level of accountability we rarely see in cases at this level. The prosecution recommends a sentence of 4 years, with eligibility for parole after 2.5 years served. 4 years. Still prison, still consequences, but less than the 5 we discussed." Then the defense spoke. Marcus kept it brief, acknowledged guilt, emphasized cooperation, made no excuses. He'd wanted to present character witnesses. I told him no. There was no character to witness. "Does the defendant wish to make a statement?" the judge asked. I stood up. I thought about what to say for weeks. In the end, I kept it simple. "Your Honor, I spent 20 years building a company and a reputation on the principle that success justified any method. I was wrong. Not just legally wrong, morally wrong. I hurt people systematically and called it business. I exploited women and called it protecting my assets. I displaced families and called it development. My voice was steady. I practiced this. I can't undo any of it. The money I've provided doesn't heal what I broke. But I want the people I've harmed to know that I see them now. I see Angela, who spent years questioning her worth because of how I treated her. I see Margaret, who sacrificed her career and got nothing in return. I see Carolyn, whose family business I casually destroyed. I see the Riverside families who lost their homes because I valued profit over people. I looked at the back of the courtroom. Nora. And I see Nora Chun, who did what no one else could. She held up a mirror and made me look at myself. She's the only person who was ever strong enough to make me stop. Nora's expression didn't change, but she held my gaze. "I accept full responsibility for everything I've done," I continued. "I'll serve whatever sentence this court deems appropriate. And when I've served it, I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to be someone who contributes instead of extracts. That's all I can offer." I sat down. The courtroom was completely silent. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Mendez, looked at me for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Mr. Calloway, in 30 years on the bench, I've seen many defendants express remorse. Most of it is performative, designed to reduce sentencing rather than reflect genuine understanding. I don't know which category your statement falls into. Only time will tell." She consulted her notes. "What I do know is this: you caused extensive harm across multiple contexts and multiple years. You built systems specifically designed to exploit legal ambiguities and human vulnerabilities. The scope of your misconduct is staggering. My chest tightened. However, she continued, you have also demonstrated a level of cooperation and restitution that is genuinely unusual. You didn't just provide testimony. You voluntarily dismantled your own financial protections. You didn't just admit guilt. You took material steps to repair harm. She set down her notes. I'm sentencing you to 4 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 2 years served. Additionally, you are permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company. You will complete 200 hours of community service upon release, specifically focused on financial literacy education for low-income communities. For years, 2 years minimum. This sentence reflects both the severity of your crimes and the significance of your cooperation, Judge Mendez said. I hope you use this time to continue the reflection you claim to have started. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. They took me into custody immediately. Standard procedure, sentencing hearing to processing to transport. Marcus had explained all of this, but the reality of it was different than the explanation. Handcuffs, processing room, inventory of personal belongings, change into standard issue clothes. I was no longer Richard Calloway, CEO. I was inmate 847392. Marcus was allowed a brief meeting before transport. You did well in there, he said. The judge's sentence was fair given the circumstances. I know. The prenup settlements will be finalized this week. Diana Park's office confirmed all 3 ex-wives have accepted the terms. He paused. They also each wrote letters that were submitted to the judge for consideration in sentencing. Did you know that? I hadn't. What did they say? I'm not supposed to share them, but... He pulled out 3 folded papers. Angela wrote that she wanted you to face consequences, but also wanted to acknowledge that the settlement you provided gave her the ability to start over in a way she'd never had before. Margaret wrote that she'd spent 2 years angry and the restitution didn't erase that, but it allowed her to finally stop fighting. And Carolyn wrote that she hoped you'd use your time in prison to understand that people aren't transactions. I held the letters without reading them. Couldn't quite bring myself to yet. And Nora? I asked. Nora didn't write a letter, but Diana Park told me something interesting. The data model Nora built, the analytical framework that mapped all your transactions, she's licensing it. Licensing it? To the Attorney General's office, to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, to several nonprofit legal organizations. She's turning it into a tool for identifying similar patterns of exploitation in other cases. Marcus almost smiled. She's weaponizing what she learned from you to stop other people like you. Of course she was. That was Nora. She didn't just solve problems. She built systems to prevent them from recurring. Tell her. I started, then stopped. What was there to tell her? Thank you for destroying me? I'm sorry I made it necessary? Tell her I understand why she did it, I said finally. And that she was right. Marcus nodded. I will. Before they transported me, I was allowed one more visitor. I assumed it would be Marcus again, or maybe one of the few business associates who hadn't completely cut ties. It was Nora. She sat across from me in the visiting room with that same calm expression, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Why are you here? I asked finally. Closure, she said simply. I spent 18 months building this case. I need to see it through to the end. This is the end? For me, yes. You'll serve your sentence. The ex-wives have their settlements. The Riverside families have their fund. The prosecutors have their testimony. My part is done. What will you do now? Keep working. I have 3 new clients, women going through divorces with prenups similar to the ones you used. Diana Park referred them. We're building cases. She tilted her head slightly. You created a template, Richard. An exploitation framework. Now I'm using that same framework to dismantle similar situations. Poetic, I said. Practical, she corrected. Then, unexpectedly, I didn't come here to gloat. I came because I wanted you to know something. What? When I married you, I expected to spend 18 months documenting a monster. Someone irredeemable and cruel. She looked at me directly. But you weren't a monster. You were just a person who'd spent so long protecting yourself that you forgot other people were real. And that's almost worse, because it means you had a choice the whole time. I know that now. Do you? She leaned forward slightly. Because here's what I need you to understand, Richard. You're going to serve 2 to 4 years. Then you're going to be released. You'll still be wealthy, not as wealthy, but comfortable. You'll have opportunities that most people never get. And at that point, you'll have another choice. What choice? Whether to spend the rest of your life being the man you were, or the man you claimed to be in that courtroom. She stood up. I'm not going to check on you. I'm not going to follow your progress. This is the last time we'll ever speak. But I want you to know that I'll be watching what you do with your second chance. Because if you waste it, if you go back to who you were, then everything I sacrificed for 18 months was for nothing. It wasn't for nothing, I said quietly. You stopped me. Permanently. I stopped one version of you, Nora said. What you become next is entirely up to you. She turned to leave. Nora. She paused at the door. Were you ever scared? I asked. During those 18 months. Living with me, knowing what you were doing. She considered the question. Every single day. But not of you, Richard. I was scared of failing. Scared that I'd spend 18 months and still not gather enough. Scared that you'd figure it out before I was ready. Scared that I'd become like you. So focused on the goal that I'd forget why it mattered. Did you? Forget why it mattered? No, she said firmly. Because every time I doubted, I thought about Angela crying in that legal aid office, telling me she must have done something wrong to deserve how you treated her. I thought about Margaret giving up after 2 years of fighting. I thought about Carolyn's family losing everything. And I thought about the woman who would have been wife number 5 if someone didn't stop you. She opened the door. Goodbye, Richard. Goodbye, Nora. She left. And I sat in that visiting room understanding that I'd just spoken to the strongest person I'd ever met. A person who'd married someone she knew was harmful, lived inside that harm for 18 months, and dismantled it piece by piece without ever losing sight of why it mattered. I thought I was smart. Thought I was strategic. Thought I was untouchable. Nora Chun had been smarter, more strategic, and had touched everything. I'm writing this from a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. I've been here for 14 months. My cell is 8 by 10 feet. I share it with a man named David who's serving 6 years for securities fraud. We don't talk much. That's fine. I spent most of my life talking without saying anything true. I'm learning to be quiet in a different way now. The first 3 months were the hardest. Not because of the conditions, though those took adjustment, but because of the silence in my own head. For 20 years, I'd filled every quiet moment with plans, with strategies, with the next deal, the next acquisition, the next move. In here, there are no moves. There's just time. Time to think about Angela's face when I handed her divorce papers after 14 months of marriage. Time to remember Margaret quietly packing her things while I worked in the next room, too busy to say goodbye properly. Time to recall Carolyn asking me, just once, if I'd ever actually loved her, and the way I'd deflected instead of answering. Time to understand that Nora had been right about everything. I'm not a monster. Monsters don't have choices. I had choices every single day, and I chose extraction over connection, profit over people, protection over honesty. That's harder to live with than being a monster would be. I've had 3 visitors in 14 months. Marcus came twice to handle remaining legal matters. The prenup settlements are finalized. Angela used her portion to start a nonprofit helping women navigate divorce proceedings. Margaret went back to school. She's finishing a graduate degree in business ethics. Carolyn's family business is slowly rebuilding with the restitution fund. They're all doing better without me in their lives. That stings, but it's also exactly how it should be. My second visitor was Margaret herself. She came 6 months into my sentence, unannounced. We sat in the visiting room and she looked at me for a long time before speaking. I didn't think I'd ever want to see you again, she said finally. Why are you here? Because I needed to know if it was real. The cooperation, the restitution, the statement at sentencing. I needed to see if you were just performing again or if something actually changed. What do you think? She studied me. I think you look different. Smaller somehow. Less polished. A pause. More real. I'm trying to be. Angela wanted me to tell you something, Margaret said. She said to tell you that forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, and she's not sure she can do either yet. But she wanted you to know the nonprofit is helping people. Real people with real lives. So something good came from something terrible. My throat closed. Tell her thank you. Tell her yourself someday. Maybe. Margaret stood to leave. Or maybe don't. Maybe the best thing you can do for all of us is stay gone and just be better with whoever comes next. She left, and I understood that forgiveness wasn't something I was entitled to. The best I could hope for was that the harm I'd caused would eventually be outweighed by whatever small good I could do going forward. My third visitor was my brother. I have a younger brother, Thomas, who I barely spoke to for 10 years because he'd chosen teaching over business, and I'd considered that a waste of potential. He came 8 months into my sentence. Why are you here? I asked. Because Mom asked me to check on you before she died. I went very still. Mom's dead. 3 weeks ago. Heart attack. I sent word through your lawyer, but I guess you didn't get it. He looked at me without sympathy. She asked about you at the end. Asked if you were okay. I told her I didn't know. Am I okay? The question came out before I could stop it. Thomas considered it. You're in prison for fraud and corruption. Your company's being run by someone else. Your ex-wives are rebuilding their lives without you. You're going to be here for at least another 10 months. He paused. But you look more like yourself than you have in 20 years. So yeah, Richard, maybe you're actually okay for the first time in a long time. After he left, I cried for my mother in a way I hadn't cried when my father died, when James died, when any of the supposedly significant losses of my life happened. Because she'd asked if I was okay, and I'd been too proud to let anyone check for decades. I take classes here. Financial literacy, which is grimly ironic given why I'm incarcerated. But the teacher, a woman named Susan who volunteers from a local nonprofit, asked me to help explain complex financial structures in ways regular people could understand. You're good at this, she said after the third class. I used to use these same explanations to manipulate people. And now you're using them to educate people, Susan said. That's called growth, Richard. I'm also working in the prison library, organizing, cataloging, helping other inmates navigate legal resources. It's quiet work, detail work, the kind of thing Nora would have been good at. I think about her sometimes. Wonder if she's still building cases, still weaponizing data against men like I used to be. Wonder if she ever thinks about those 18 months. Probably not. She said goodbye and meant it. That's okay. Some people enter your life to stay, and some enter to fundamentally change its direction and then leave. Nora was the second kind, and I'm grateful for it even though it cost me everything. Especially because it cost me everything. I'm eligible for parole in 10 months. My lawyer says I'll likely get it given my cooperation and lack of disciplinary issues. I'll walk out of here at 48 years old with a fraction of the wealth I had. No company, no reputation, and a permanent record that will follow me forever. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what comes next. I'm not allowed to run a company. I'm not allowed to serve on boards. The career I built is permanently closed to me, and that's appropriate. But Susan suggested something. She said the nonprofit she works for needs someone to develop financial literacy curricula for underserved communities. Someone who understands complex financial structures and can explain them clearly. Someone who knows exactly how exploitation works because he used to practice it. We can't pay much, she said. But you wouldn't be doing it for the money. I told her I'd think about it. The old Richard would have seen that offer as beneath him. A waste of his capabilities. Charity work for people who should just work harder and be smarter with money. The current Richard, the one who spent 14 months with absolutely nothing to do but think, sees it differently. I spent 20 years extracting value from people and calling it success. Maybe I could spend the next 20 adding value instead. It won't erase what I did. It won't give Angela back her confidence or Margaret her career years or Carolyn her family business or Riverside families their homes. But it might mean that wife number 5, the woman who would have married me if Nora hadn't stopped me, gets to marry someone else instead. Someone better. Someone who never learned her patterns in order to exploit them. And the communities I would have displaced in my next development get to stay in their homes. And the people I would have structured exploitative deals with learn to see those structures coming. Nora said she was scared of failing. Scared she'd spend 18 months and not gather enough evidence. But she succeeded completely. She didn't just stop me. She changed the trajectory of every harm I would have caused for the rest of my life. That's extraordinary. I got a letter last week. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a single sentence. Asterisk, I saw the financial literacy work. Keep going. Asterisk. No signature. Just that. Nora had been watching after all. Not checking on me, she'd been clear about that. But watching what I chose to do with the second chance she'd created. And she'd seen me choose something different. I folded the letter and put it in the box under my bunk where I keep the few things that matter. Marcus's legal notes, Margaret's visit summary, Thomas's photo of our mother. Evidence of a life I'm rebuilding from absolute zero. My name is Richard Calloway. I divorced women like it was a hobby until one wife made me regret everything. But regret isn't quite the right word anymore. Nora didn't make me regret my choices. She made me face them. She held up a mirror with such precision and persistence that I finally had to look at who I'd become and decide whether that was who I wanted to stay. I chose different. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I'm not even close to finished. I'll be working at it for the rest of my life. Being someone who contributes instead of extracts, who connects instead of performs, who sees people as people instead of transactions. Some days I'm better at it than others. But I'm trying, which is more than I did for 20 years. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in who I was, someone who's built walls so high you can't see over them anymore, someone who's prioritized success over connection so long you've forgotten what connection feels like, someone who's hurt people and called it practicality. I want you to know something. You can change. Not easily. Not without cost. But you can choose right now to start being someone different. You don't need someone like Nora to force you into it. You can just decide. The cost of changing is high, but the cost of staying who you are is higher, even if you can't see it yet. Trust me on that. I paid both costs. Changing is better. 10 months from now, I'll walk out of this facility. I'll take a job teaching financial literacy to people I would have once dismissed. I'll live modestly in a way I once would have found humiliating. I'll spend my time adding small amounts of value to the world instead of extracting large amounts for myself. And somewhere in this city, Nora Chun will continue building cases against men like I used to be. Weaponizing data. Protecting women who might otherwise sign prenups they don't understand and marry men who see them as transactions. She'll never speak to me again. That's how it should be. But I'll know she's out there, making sure the pattern I represented stops with me. That's enough. More than enough. Thank you for listening to my story.